What's up guys? So as I promised in the last Fire Emblem 3 Hopes video, where I covered my thoughts on the Golden Wildfire route, I am continuing this little mini-series with my thoughts on Azure Gleam, from my favorite parts of the route to some of the issues that I have with it, but honestly, don't expect too much criticism, because as the title states, I personally think that this route might be the canon route, and I promise I will explain why later in the video. Anyways, just like in the previous video, I will be covering the entirety of the Blue Lions route, including the good end as opposed to the bad end, with as little detail as possible. But I do heavily urge you to play the game yourself before watching this, if you haven't experienced the game yourself, because again, I will be spoiling more or less the entire route. And of course, if you don't care about being spoiled, then by all means, continue watching. But without further ado, let's jump into the story. So as we all should know, the first few chapters are the same regardless of the route. It starts off with us getting to know the three separate leaders and how they play, and we also get to learn a little bit about all the individual units aside from Bernie because she's just built different, and shortly thereafter we are forced to pick our favorite child. And since we're focusing on the Blue Lions, we obviously choose Dimitri. After choosing Dimitri, we are given a very warm welcome by everyone in the Blue Lions except for Felix. Following that, we obviously save Monica, Tomas is revealed to be evil, and unlike in the other routes, we got a civil war on our hands, led by none other than Dimitri's uncle. I gotta say, I really enjoy this dynamic of Azure Gleam, but I'll expand on that later. Anyways, I really enjoy this chapter of the game because very early on, it shows you just how much Dimitri loves the kingdom, and just how much compassion he has for not only the people around him, but also the citizens as well, since you can clearly tell that he is not only bothered by the whole situation with his uncle, but also with the fact that there has to be fighting in the streets of the capital. And I can't stress enough how much I love that they established such an integral part of his personality this early on. On top of making a key part of this route's story very personal, not only for the leader, but also for the rest of the cast. After apprehending Rufus and failing to capture Cornelia, who capitalized on Rufus's fear and incited the Civil War in the first place, we get a lovely cinematic that reiterates how this is affecting Dimitri, and it also shows that he has a heavy sense of duty and will not refrain from killing even family if it means that that is the best for Faerghus. And on top of that, it also shows how some people can view Dimitri, which is that he is ruthless and has no sympathy whatsoever, at least from his uncle's perspective. And honestly, it's a fair assessment given that Dimitri in Three Houses tends to be viewed in that exact same light, and I really like that even though it's vague and somewhat overlooked at first, the devs did leave an Easter egg alluding to that timeline. Now moving forward, Sylvain's father reveals that not only was Rufus and many of the Western lords involved with the assassination of Dimitri's father, but some of the imperial nobility had also funded the tragedy of Duscur as well. He also links Edelgard and Lord Arundel to the matter as well, which I think is honestly a pretty big lore drop, especially this early on. And with all of that information, Dimitri decides to make all of it public, which is extremely bold in my opinion, but again, it just shows the type of leader that Dimitri is. He wants to be completely transparent with everyone who follows him. And if you can't tell yet, I really love Dimitri. He won me over very early on, and I only ended up loving his character more and more after reading all of the support dialogues, but I will be talking about that in his own section. After that very intense prologue of sorts, Dimitri decides that his time in the academy is of course over, as well as making the decision to reorganize his army and give Shez the position of commanding their own troop. And from there, the Civil War continues on for the next 2 years. And honestly, I kind of wish that we could play through those 2 years and have half of the Civil War arc take place in this time span, because personally, I just feel like that would be more fitting as far as pacing is concerned, but I digress. After the time skip, Edelgard of course declares war on the Central Church, surprising no one, and that leaves the kingdom with the decision on whether or not to step in and offer protection to the Central Church, revenge against the Empire. But the kingdom does decide to defend the church, of course, after a very intense conversation of the positive and negatives, which Felix ends with basically saying, let's cut the shit and make a decision. And of course, that is followed by Dimitri saying that though it would be nice to follow in the Empire's footsteps and make some of the changes that they have in the past few years, the kingdom doesn't need such a radical change in the time of a civil war. Since, needless to say, everyone who is against the change will just side with the Western Lords because that's just how things work. And Dimitri also says that if there was to be real lasting change, it has to come from a solid foundation, which leads into the kingdom inserting themselves into a second war. And as Rhea makes way to the kingdom, it takes very little time for the Empire to notice, and immediately Petra's unit along with Hubert are sent to pursue her. And of course, after defeating them and saving Rhea, there's a conversation with Arval that surprisingly seems to show that in this route, Shez isn't as preoccupied with getting revenge against Byleth as Arval is, at least. Meanwhile, Dimitri and co deduce that Cornelia is most likely hiding in the western territories of Faerghus. Dimitri also comes to terms with the fact that he may have to kill some of the Western Lords to save the country. And while he comes to this revelation, Felix takes notice and decides to more or less harass him about it, which leads into a pretty dark conversation that gives us some perspective on how much Dimitri longs for revenge, and also how he sees himself as nothing more than a would-be martyr who does everything that he can to atone for all of the guilt that he has about being the only survivor of the tragedy. While that lovely conversation happens, Monica gives Edelgard an update on Hubert's failure, as well as Petra's capture if you decide to persuade her, of course. Edelgard also accepts that war with the kingdom is unavoidable, and also reveals that Yuri's adoptive father is an ally of the Empire, and she also plans to use Count Ro as a way to gain favor with the Western Lords. And surprisingly, Lord Lonato, who is Ash's adoptive father, vows to kill Rhea and thus joins the Empire. After news hits the main crew, of course, it's pretty admirable that Dimitri is willing to let Ash leave and rejoin his father. Of course, if that was what Ash desired. And I really do like that Dimitri later on reinforces this conversation in his support with Ash, reiterating that he does not want Ash, or anyone in that matter, to lay down their lives for him, and rather live for themselves, even if that means turning their own weapons against Dimitri. And honestly, coming from a king, that's really impressive. And again, speaks to how good-hearted Dimitri really is. But moving forward, we witness a conversation between Gwendol and Count Ro, which honestly justifies Lord Lonato's actions, revealing that it was the church who had killed Lonato's son. And it is also later revealed in a support conversation with Catherine that Lonato's son was involved in the tragedy of Duscur, which, of course, isn't true, but regardless, the point is, I cannot blame Lonato for defecting to the Empire given those are his motivations, because I'd probably do the same thing in his shoes. And of course, neither does Gwendol. But after the first and last encounter with Lonato, we get a wonderful introduction to a new commander of the kingdom's army, who is also Sylvain's older brother Miklan, who, unlike in Three Houses, isn't a demonic beast, but instead was captured while still a bandit, and instead of being put into jail, Dimitri decided to employ him, thus beginning Miklan's redemption arc. But aside from that, given his history with Sylvain, I honestly thought this was a surprising decision, but the reasonings that Dimitri gave in his explanation to Felix kind of make sense. And it also goes to show that he heavily questions this crest system, given that he wonders if things would be different if both Miklan and Rufus had crests. And of course, Dimitri questioning the crest system becomes even more apparent in the B support conversation Dimitri has with Sylvain, where he discusses dismantling the crest system entirely, which I didn't play through Azure Moon, so Dimitri having these thoughts was a welcome surprise. And I guess that is more assumption on my part, but given that he defends the church, I thought that he maybe agreed with their ideologies. But the fact that he doesn't makes him a really interesting and very dynamic character, at least to me. So shortly thereafter, while discussing plans for retaking Aryan Road, Shez yet again makes it very clear that they aren't looking to exact revenge on Byleth, which to be honest makes recruiting them later in the story feel a lot more natural as opposed to the Golden Deer route, where Shez very much wants revenge. Now, continuing with the story, surprising no one, Count Rowe folds immediately and returns to the kingdom's side. While everyone is planning on how to proceed forward, we are informed that Cornelia has attacked an escort containing Count Rowe, but regaining the Arendelle territory, of course, is more important, and after barely achieving that victory, Dimitri, Dedu, and Rodrigue leave to assist in dealing what appears to be a Strang attack that has gotten out of hand in the north, which all of the cast find especially concerning given that they have not gotten a single missive from Margrave Gautier. But very quickly, it is revealed that this was a trap, and Felix makes the decision to follow Dimitri to Ferdiad. Though Felix thinks that if it was that pressing of a matter, the Margrave would have sent word that they needed to hurry, and against his better judgment, they decide to head towards Ferdiad as well. And partway through, they do receive word that the situation is pretty dire. It seems that whoever was attacking the capital was even threatening to attack the civilians, which in turn obviously caused Dimitri to surrender. And upon arriving at Ferdiad, the armies of the Western Lords are of course occupying the capital, but it is also revealed that there is an unidentifiable force as well, which we all know is those who slither in the dark. After initiating the assault on Ferdiad, eventually you will find your way to this beautiful cutscene of Felix and Shez attempting to bring Dimitri to his senses, which fails of course until Dedu finally talks some sense into him by giving him his spear personally, I guess, I don't know. Now, one small thing that kind of bothered me in this cinematic is that we see Felix wielding his relic sword, but I do want to point out that you can't actually unlock this sword until I think like chapter 13 or 14, and in a future cinematic they also only show Felix wielding a silver sword, so clearly they made the decision to swap the two relics at some point. Now, after finishing the rest of that battle, Cornelia is captured and it is revealed that Edelgard is Dimitri's stepsister, which kind of blew my mind. And it is also revealed that Cornelia was replaced in the same way Tomas was, and in the same way Kranya was supposed to replace Monica. After those two reveals, as well as Dimitri's questions regarding his mother, Cornelia escapes to the west, and Dimitri vows to attack the west in turn. And finally, during all of this, Felix's frustration with Dimitri comes to a boiling point, which Felix tells him that he is not the only one who wants revenge, and he can rely on more people than just himself, and will continue to remind him several more times throughout the story. But of course, at this point in time, it doesn't really get through to Dimitri, even though the whole cast literally reiterates Felix's words, because Dimitri, of course, feels that this is his responsibility alone. But focusing on Felix for a second, honestly, leading up to this scene, compared to my experience with Felix in Three Houses, he seemed to resent Dimitri way more in this game than he ever did in Three Houses. Granted, obviously I was using him outside of the Azure Moon route, so maybe that's why there's a significant difference. But even though Mercedes says that he does care, it literally took all the way till some of the higher supports with him to realize that he just sucks at showing that he cares. And in Felix's A support with Dimitri, watching Felix force Dimitri to get some sleep was honestly pretty adorable, and finally showed to me at least how much Felix truly cares about him. But going back to the story, while that support group conversation is taking place, Cornelia is busy twisting words around and scaring the Western Lords enough to convince them to take up arms against the King of Faerghus. And while Dimitri and co are in pursuit of Cornelia, at some point Duscar's chief has supplied forces to assist Faerghus in the war effort, which shows that though the relationship between the two countries has been strained, paired with Dedu, Felix, and Ingrid's Prologue, it's shown that the relationship is actively improving, and this eventually will lead up to a lot of soldiers, Ingrid included, to warming up and accepting the people of Duscur. After quelling the threat of the Western Lords, they confront Cornelia for the final time, who in her last breath manages to try to set Dimitri's sights on Edelgard by telling him that his stepmother killed his father stepmother so she could return to Eddie, and in turn, Edelgard killed her. Thankfully, Dimitri isn't dumb enough to fall for it completely, but he still wants to see if Edelgard knows anything about the situation. We also get a huge lore drop regarding Dimitri's stepmother and the original Cornelia's actions, which also makes me question, does this mean that Dimitri's stepmother was always working with those who slither in the dark, or like Cornelia, was she just replaced at one point or another? Because we never really get that clarification with his stepmother, at least, so if you know the answer, make sure to leave it in the comments for me, please. But with the Uprising crushed, now the Blue Lions can focus fully on the war effort. And while they come to rescue Aryan Road, Edelgard, Yuri, Ferdinand, and Gwendol all discuss what to do going forward in the siege of the Silver Maiden. While preparing for battle, Miklan has a conversation with Catherine and Shamir that honestly kind of made me warm up to his character a little bit, but given Yuri's past and the things that he says about Miklan, it's kind of hard to exactly like his character, but it does go to show that if the crest system wasn't in place before, he would be a very outstanding commander, and honestly, who knows where he'd be if he hadn't been a bandit. But seeing just how far his character development has gone is cut short by the Empire attacking. And during the battle, unfortunately, he was killed by Gwendol. And honestly, it was a little nice, I guess, to see, even though he didn't have the best relationship with his father or Sylvain, they both did feel something about him passing. Regardless of how small those feelings were, it's still better to see a reaction than nothing at all. And it also makes me wonder what would have happened if he hadn't been killed in this chapter. But focusing on the actual big part of this chapter, we see Edelgard and Dimitri fight each other in a very intense cinematic. We also are shown that apparently Edelgard was led to believe that Dimitri was working with those who slither in the dark, and it was also nice to see Dimitri protect her in turn after learning that that is not true. But unfortunately, that doesn't last very long because Edelgard is attacked by Felix and turned into whatever this thing is, which honestly made my heart drop because I love Edelgard. She was my favorite leader in Three Houses, so seeing her look like this was not any fun for me. But after that, we get Shez rescuing Dimitri in this very wholesome walk of shame type thing, and soon thereafter we are informed that whatever Edelgard was turned into has completely disappeared, and the Empire's army has retreated. Following that scene, Shez is hit with the revelation that her powers are very similar to several people in this mysterious organization. And I want to take the time to say, I really love how involved those who slither in the dark is in this route, at least compared to the Golden Deer's route, despite the fact that Lysithea has the backstory that she does, which I've already harped on enough in the Golden Deer video. But for Azure Gleam, from being behind the civil war with the West, as well as the motivating factor of the tragedy of Duscur, and even corrupting the Empire going forward, the devs did a wonderful job of making it very obvious in this route that the villain is not Edelgard, not Rhea, not Dimitri, but Felix. Unlike in Golden Deers, where it doesn't seem like those who slither in the dark even matter at all, despite the fact that their base is inside of Leicester. Unless for whatever reason Byleth is involved, it's sad. But I digress. After Shez's revelation, Dimitri comes to the same revelation I just described, that maybe the Empire isn't the true threat after all. And while Dimitri heads back to Ferdiad to recover, Felix instates Duke von Eiger as the new Prime Minister of Adrestia. And it is also revealed that Edelgard is alive and well, or is she? Because now she is nothing more than a mere puppet of Felix's, and after a brief time skip, the situation in the Empire has made a turn for the worst. Under Regent Eiger's control, everything has gone to shit. The narrator literally says the rivers run red with the blood of all of its citizens, and the Empire is allowing its armies to slaughter and raise its own villages. Honestly, that sounds horrifying, and I honestly can't imagine how Ferdinand feels of all of the people still inside the Empire, because it's under the rule of his father. And honestly, I think it's a huge shame that we never really are shown what any of the Black Eagles cast is doing or how they feel about this, because I know damn well Hubert is pissed, and I also can't imagine that any of them will stand for it either. But I'm getting carried away. On the kingdom side of things, while Dimitri was having a conversation with Rhea, Claude creates a plan for a combined attack on the Empire and also forges a partnership with the kingdom, while also hoping that it's long-lasting. But Dimitri isn't exactly convinced that Claude is being totally transparent, and after that conversation with the church concludes, Claude proceeds to pick Dimitri's brain on the situation with the church, and also shows that Dimitri has thought about kicking the central church to the curb, but isn't convinced that it will be worth it. Soon after you continue the push into the Empire, the crew comes across a horrific scene of a village slaughtered by the Imperial Army, and while contemplating the reasonings for such a scene, they are attacked by the Western Church, led by Myson, who proceeds to question Shez about the source of their powers before disappearing. It's also really eerie the closer to those who slither in the dark that the cast gets. Arval seems to be pushing harder and harder for Shez to kill Byleth, which, of course, if we want the good end, we can't allow that to happen. Fast forwarding a few chapters later, though we do end up recruiting Byleth and Geralt reveals that he has a complicated past with Rhea and does not wish to see her. Though I didn't get any of the supports with Geralt just yet, I wonder if this possibly has something to do with Byleth's mother. That aside, we now have a foothold in Hevering territory and the Ashen Demon on the Blue Lion side. So Dimitri and co prepare to take back the monastery instead of continuing to push forward in the Empire. And now, another thing that I've kind of been milling over that I find kind of weird. During this same exact conversation where they make plans, Mercedes also begins wondering where the Death Knight has been, and Annette also mentions that he used to show up all the time, despite the Death Knight only showing up in one fight previously. So was he originally supposed to show up a few more times in separate battles? I kind of wonder why the devs decided to make that change if so. But anyways, the final push awaits. Marching through the Valley of Torment, both Dimitri and Claude's forces have a very tiring battle ahead of them, given that they are up against the famous Count Burgleys. The same Count Burgleys that the Alliance has been trying to avoid this entire time. Now, I have a very big gripe with this specific section of the game, because during this fight, Regent Iger and Edelgard are both originally leading this battle until it's painfully obvious that the Kingdom and Alliance are breaking through, and Regent Iger calls over Leopold and Caspar and has the both of them try to fend everyone off. And after overpowering both of the Burgleys and having them both retreat, Claude tells Dimitri to take his forces and go on ahead, while Claude holds off the rest of the Imperial army. And now going back a second, when Leopold appears on the battlefield, he is fully aware of the fact that Edelgard isn't all there. And I know Caspar isn't the brightest in the bunch, but he has to also be aware of the facade as well. And as Caspar and his father reconvene with Ludwig and Eddie, it's very obvious that Caspar sees what's going on. And personally, I don't really think that he would continue to be as loyal as he is, because I know that he is afraid of his father and he does not really think things through, but I really don't think that this is in line with his character whatsoever. And as the kingdom catch up to Duke Iger, it appears that Edelgard has wandered off, thankfully. And during this fight, Caspar stands in the way of the kingdom yet again, but he does not survive this battle. And this fight was extremely upsetting for me, especially since no one even said anything after his death. Not his father, not Duke Iger, not Count Hevering, nothing. No one. It just really rubs me the wrong way, because given that I know Caspar has no issue turning his back on Eddie in the Silver Snow route of Three Houses, why would he die for an empire that slaughters innocent citizens? I don't understand that. Even though I know he wants to protect Edelgard, he has to know that switching sides is the best way to achieve that. And seriously, in my opinion, the whole situation behind the Silver Snow route and him turning his back on Edelgard in there isn't as bad as an Imperial army slaughtering citizens and razing villages for literally no reason. So the fact that Caspar refuses to back down to the point of death, knowing how fucked the Empire is right now, just makes his death really hard to swallow for me. On top of that, I personally believe that at least the Three Houses version of him would have defected in an instant after seeing Edelgard in the way that she is. And it just makes me really sad that no one acknowledges his sacrifice whatsoever. But after finally killing Regent Iger, Byleth and Shez split off to try to find Edelgard, or so we think. Instead, Shez, or Arval deciding to hijack Shez, attempts to kill Byleth. While everyone heads over to save Byleth, those who slither in the dark take this opportunity to attack. And after defeating Solon, he runs from Dimitri's group, only to be slaughtered by Shez themselves. And Arval pulls Dimitri, Claude, and a very confused Edelgard into a completely different plane, or something. I'm not really sure how to describe it. It's just a weird magic place. I don't know. And we are given a huge lore drop on the true identity of Arval and what Epimenides not only is, but also what their goal is. Soon after, Shez wakes up surrounded by all three of the leaders, and after a bit of banter from Claude and some recap from Dimitri, Edelgard explains that the last thing that she remembers is the Battle of Aryan Road, which Dimitri reminds her is 6 months ago. Dimitri informs her of the state of the Empire and how they got there, but before continuing on, you are given the opportunity to speak to each leader. And while having a very short conversation with Edelgard, you witness Dimitri and Claude have their own conversation, and I have to say, it's nice to see pretty much the exact conversation more or less that they would have had in the Golden Deers route if Claude hadn't been interrupted. And I'm very happy to see that Claude has the same opinion on the crest system regardless of the route, and has the same plan as he does in Golden Wildfire. Though his original plan is quite delayed in this route, but his reasonings are extremely valid. The forced marriages, all of the obligations and duties just because of having a crest, on top of being forbidden to have contact with outside regions, though literally none of these factions follow that rule. And as much as I agree with Claude, Dimitri's counterpoints make sense from his perspective, because though he holds the same opinions personally, even if he doesn't want to outright abolish the central church as a king for the sake of continuing to rule the kingdom, at this point, with Faerghus being the only country that will accept them, having freedom of religion or not being allowed to go wherever isn't exactly something the central church will have a place to outright deny anymore. Dimitri's second and last reasonings of being afraid of starting a war or people might come after him are personally nothing more than paranoia at its best, because sure, in Faerghus that may be the case, I'm not sure. But as we've seen in Golden Wildfire, if handled correctly, the citizens will not be as unruly as Dimitri fears. In fact, they might be slightly accepting? I don't know, they didn't really focus on it that much, but I really enjoyed this conversation a lot. Almost as much as I enjoyed Dimitri's conversation with Edelgard. It is a wonderful contrast to their relationship in Three Houses, though it is pretty unfortunate that Dimitri doesn't get the answers that he was seeking from Edelgard, but at the same time, it's really cute seeing Dimitri help Edelgard up after she fell over, and just shows that he really does not hold any grudges against her, unlike in Three Houses. And after finally killing Epimenides in that dope-ass cutscene, it also seems that we kill Arval as well. After escaping the fever dream, as Dimitri calls it, Edelgard seems to have disappeared to Garrick Mach. But before continuing on to the last chapter, I just want to say that after experiencing what happens if Byleth does get recruited, and seeing the plan of Epimenides, none of this happening without Byleth being involved makes even less sense, in my opinion. Because, at least in this route, Epimenides would be triggered regardless of Sothis being around or not. Because even without Sothis, they will still share the goal that Thalis has, and Thalis would probably still activate whatever activated Epimenides, in my opinion. So this whole chapter being locked behind Byleth kind of is redundant, especially in this route. Now, perhaps in Golden Wildfire, it would make sense not to, I guess, but as I said, in this route, with those who slither in the dark being as heavily involved as they are, Epimenides not appearing personally just makes no sense to me. But as I said, that's just my opinion. After Dimitri and Claude go their separate ways, it appears Edelgard has now fallen under the control of Thalis yet again. And going into the final chapter, the text says that Dimitri wants to kill both Thalis and Edelgard, and it feels like the same sort of situation with Dimitri and Claude near the end of the Golden Wildfire route, because Dimitri gives off zero vibes of wanting to kill Edelgard whatsoever throughout the game. Obviously, he does say a handful of times that he will kill her if she needs to be killed, but he doesn't want to kill her. So I'm guessing there's an earlier version of the game where Dimitri holds some type of animosity towards her. And I mean, he even says literally after this text rules that he knows Edelgard isn't the one calling the shots anymore. So what would he want to kill her for at this point? He gains nothing from it. Going into the final battle with high spirits off of the back of a beautiful speech from the king, though it wasn't exactly an easy fight, with the easiest part of this battle being killing Bernie's father, it definitely was a fun one, especially with the fight against Thalos. During the fight with Thalos, it was very nerve-wracking because I really didn't want to have to kill Edelgard, and thankfully, Dimitri exacts revenge on Thalos only, sparing Eddie. But I gotta say, this cinematic was really badass. Watching Dimitri just eat those blasts of magic without a care in the world was honestly 10 out of 10. And I have to say, the way this route ends is a great way to cap this game off. But of course, my whole opinion is kind of a spoiler, so spoiler alert if you haven't played through Golden Wildfire and don't want to know how it ends. Just skip to this time code right here and you'll be good. But anyways, Azure Gleam's ending felt a lot more complete than Golden Deer's ending, though it ends essentially the same way. In this route, there is barely any Empire left to go through, as opposed to in Golden Wildfire, there's literally the entire Empire or Kingdom that still needs to be brought down. So in a sense, playing through capturing the rest of the Empire's territories as the finale of the game obviously is a little redundant. So personally, I think as much as it pains me, I think this route overall is a whole lot better than the Golden Wildfire route, as much as I love Claude and the Golden Deers. But now I'm going to cover why at the beginning of this video, I personally believe that this is the true route, or the canon route. And I personally feel like it's pretty obvious. I mean, the game ended on a high note and a bright future ahead of literally everybody but Casper. But another reason why I feel like this is the true route is because of Shez's interactions with all of the characters. Now, this is also going to include very minute spoilers for Golden Wildfire, so I apologize, but Shez seems to be a lot more invested in the Blue Lions members than they were with a majority of the Golden Deers. From telling Dimitri that they will always be by their side, to trying their damnedest to take care of him as much as they do, as well as offering to stay by Ingrid's side when she inherits Galtea's throne in the A support with Ingrid, as well as becoming essentially best friends with Felix, Annette, and Sylvain. Literally, that type of camaraderie really goes for a majority of everyone in the kingdom, especially considering that half of the cast are all childhood friends, which may be part of why everyone seems so tightly knit. But honestly, as I said, given how close Shez becomes with everybody, and the promises that are made that I didn't really get to see Shez make with anyone in the Golden Deers aside from maybe Lysithea, I feel like as far as Shez is concerned, this is the true end. Now, before I finish the video, I want to make some quick comments about specific characters that I enjoyed, and also some changes that were made or additions to their personalities, stuff like that. And I know that I didn't do any character highlights for the Golden Wildfire route, I apologize, but I mostly did that just because I wanted to cut down on time. But as you can see, this video is already way too long, so what's a few extra minutes? In Three Houses, Annette had dreams of being a professor just like Byleth, but of course she did also want to not only get better at magic, but also she loved singing. And that was more of just she sung while she did chores and things like that. But I was delighted to see that in this game, my best girl of the Blue Lions, of course, still had dreams of being a teacher, but also not only did she sing in her free time, but she also wrote songs specifically to sing to soldiers in the camp. And though her lyrics are still a little out there, she still is as adorable as ever, and I'm very happy to see where her indie career takes her. Next up is Sylvain. Now, I never really gave him a chance in Three Houses, given the type of character that he is when he's younger, but honestly, I'm kind of kicking myself for not giving him a chance beforehand, because outside of Dimitri and male Shez, Sylvain actually ended up becoming my favorite male character in this game, and I really want to go back to Three Houses and see how similar or different he is in that game. Also, he gets bonus points for being bi in this game. Next up is Mercedes and Constance. Honestly, I'm really upset about the interactions that aren't there for the both of them, given that when you do recruit Constance in this game, Mercedes says that they are very good friends, but if you go to their support conversations, there's nothing, and I really feel like that's, I don't even know how to describe it really. It's just a very unfortunate missed opportunity, I guess. I don't know. I am just kind of upset that there's nothing for Mercedes and Constance, because I feel like watching their conversations would be interesting. But that aside, the final thing that I want to talk about is a ship that I never in a million years thought that I would be speaking on. But yeah, if you haven't seen any of Bernadette and Dimitri's support conversations, I highly encourage you to go through all of them because they are adorable together. I'm serious. And now finally, just like how Claude got his own section, I'm giving Dimitri his own as well. But thankfully, for the version of myself that has to edit this entire video, I'm going to keep it relatively brief. So, as I mentioned early on in this video, I love Dimitri and find him extremely admirable. And I love a majority of his qualities, from his selflessness to his devotion to his people and devotion to his friends. But I think that maybe he is a little too heavy on all of the dark and depressing and grief that he feels, especially considering that he isn't the only one grieving, which though Felix's brother and Rodrigue's son is also involved, everyone has also told him that several times that he isn't the only one, but it doesn't really hit with me as much until Ingrid's A support, when she reveals to us that she was engaged to Glenn. It becomes about questioning whether Dimitri really realizes or cares that other people are grieving at that point, but though he may lay it on thick with his guilt, after seeing his A support with Felix, I felt really bad for Dimitri, and I kind of understood the way that he is a little bit more, because he's literally being haunted by all of the people who died at the tragedy of Duscur. And it's really obvious why he does all of the good that he does and how he treats everybody, as well as going above and beyond for everyone else's sake, because he literally feels like he's being watched. Now, does that mean that I think that he's doing all of these things because of his situation? No, I don't. I think that that's just the way that he is. But given that, again, he feels like he's being watched all the time, it does kind of make sense as to why he feels like the weight of the world is on his shoulders. And though I did find his gloom and doom slightly annoying the further in the game that we got, now it makes me appreciate that aspect of him a little bit more. And I've always seen people comment about how good of a character that Dimitri is, even before this game came out, but now that I have seen his character firsthand and experienced everything that I possibly can with him, I really see why so many people love him. And with that, I conclude my review of the Blue Lions route. If you watch this video in its entirety, not only are you insane, but I also thank you so much. You do not understand how much I appreciate you. And speaking of appreciation, this channel hit 600 subscribers last week, and I honestly cannot thank everyone who has subscribed to this channel enough. And with that being said, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe, and also make sure to leave a comment if you want to see a video on my opinion of the Black Eagles route. It would honestly mean a lot to me. But as I said previously, thank you so much for watching, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video.